Good morning. My name is SeanGallagher. I'm the Director of the Centre for the New Workforce at Swinburne University Technology. Thanks very much for joining me today. I'm sorry that we can't all be in the same room together, but I'm glad that we're able to connect virtually. And certainly I'll be joining in the Q&A and available online to answer any questions or respond to any comments that you have throughout the presentation. Again, thanks very much for joining me here today for my presentation, Peak Human Workplace Innovation in the Unprecedented Era. But before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm recording this presentation on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Australia faces disruption on steroids. That was a headline that jumped out at me on the back page of the Fin Review a couple of months ago. It foretells of mammoth disruption in energy as Andrew Forrest and his Fortescue Future Industries, which is his investment company, seeks to use renewable energy and hydrogen to turn Australia into a green steel powerhouse. The reason I like this story is Andrew Forrest isn't waiting for legacy industries to be disrupted by the complex world around him. He seeks to be a disruptor and to create new ones himself. And that is precisely the opportunity that I think all organizations need to begin to realize that's in front of them. We are living and breathing in what I call the unprecedented era. It's not just the global mega challenges that we know and don't like so much, like the pandemic, the globalization, climate change, but is that combined with the profound transformation of society and the economy by digital technologies. The pace of change, the interdependencies, always expanding and evolving with those digital ecosystems, that combined with global mega challenges is, I think, without precedent. And how is it manifesting? Well, instead of disruption, I think we now need to start talking about complex disruption. So whereas Clayton Christensen 20 years ago coined the term disruptive innovation, where a legacy company was disrupted by a new technology, I think companies now need to be aware of complex disruption. And it's most evident in the rapidly changing demand patterns of your customers. And the behaviors and the expectations are constantly evolving. What that means is that if you think your product suite, your solutions, the services you offer today are fine, then by not constantly creating new value, the value you have is going to be gradually eroding because of the disruptive changes and the change in behaviors of our customers around us. This is a great little cartoon that I think sums it up pretty well. It doesn't matter how perfect our business plans, our strategic plans are, if they don't take into account the crazy and complex world around us and are constantly being responsive and adjusting to that, then they're really not worth anything at all. I had the pleasure of launching the report, Peak Human Workplace Innovation in the Unprecedented Era, about a couple of months ago. And its message is quite simple. I think all organizations need to face complex disruption in order to create value. Why? Because that's where the greatest potential to create value is. It's also where the gravest threats lie. And to do this, it's by harnessing the creative power of people in our organizations. How do we enable innovation? How do we enable finding ideas and advancing them? We've long known that ideas flourish when knowledge boundaries are pushed, especially when we have lots of people around the table. But exactly what types of learning and collaboration are the ideal workplace settings to enable innovation in this complex world we find ourselves in? That's what we set to find out. And we surveyed more than 1,000 Australian workers. And all of the details are in the report, but I'm certainly going to pick out the highlights for you here today. The key finding is this: what enables innovation in workplaces is worker-driven learning and collaboration diversity. They are the ideal workplace settings to drive new ideas. They are the ideal workplace settings to solve complex problems. So what are they? Well, worker-driven learning. We know the 70-20-10 rubric for learning, where 70% of learning is doing new tasks and pushing ourselves with difficult work opportunities. 20% is learning with and through and from our colleagues. And the 10% is the more formal, structured delivery of content, if you like. Well, it's the 70 and the 20 that is really the ideal setting to drive new ideas. And in fact, that is really what we call worker-driven learning. So where workers are empowered to do the learning that they need, not just also as individuals, but also as teams to push boundaries. That is ideal for the right place to create new knowledge. On the other side is collaboration diversity. Diversity is far more than just diversity of expertise and experience. It's also the diversity of perspective and vantage point on a problem. Collaboration diversity is where workers from across the organization come together to focus on complex problems, to better understand them and to come up with solutions. So generating those new ideas, incubating them, and then scaling them, be it innovation, be it complex problem solving. It's the diversity of people around the table that is absolutely critical to ensuring that we generate those new ideas. So enabling workplaces for innovation, the two ideal workplace settings are that worker-driven learning and collaboration diversity. The report makes one key recommendation. I think all organizations need to think about having an institutional capability that is focused on driving innovation. We call it the innovation architecture, and it's built on 3 levels. At its core is a learning workplace. Above is a system that basically harnesses and is a surveillance capability on disruption and brings that together to identify opportunities to create value. In the same way that Andrew Forrest and his Fortescue Metals is doing, he's identifying disruption and turning that into value. And finally, we need the right culture in place to drive the right mindsets and behaviors to ensure that the organization is constantly adapting towards innovation. This innovation architecture is built on worker-driven learning and collaboration diversity. I go into it in great detail in the report and certainly would encourage you to take a look. I'm only going to focus on the learning workplace here today. So what is a learning workplace? It's probably a term you've heard used by others in many other contexts, but let me tell you what I think it is. Learning workplace is where there are 2 parallel yet complementary pathways to learning in an organization. One is organization-driven learning, and we might think of that as formal, structured type of learning, and in fact, that's absolutely a critical foundation piece to learning in organizations. Although I think increasingly, rather than having a broad spectrum type approach to organization learning, that increasingly we need to leverage platform learning, having libraries of content where we can draw various modules and customize them in a way that is tailored to the individual or the organization in the circumstances that they find themselves in. But that has to be combined with this worker-driven learning. Let me talk to you about what I think it means in this context. It means, first of all, learning in the flow of work, making sure that our workers are empowered to learn just in time, to get over those hurdles, to make sure that they are constantly advancing work. And in the pace of work, they don't have time to speak to their bosses or to find out what learning they need. They need to be empowered to figure it out themselves. And the ultimate form of worker-driven learning is where they're creating new knowledge, solving unforeseen problems or tackling new challenges, just in the same way that Andrew Forrest's green steel approach is. He has a philosophy of how do we tackle existing problems in innovative new ways. That is fundamentally, that is worker-driven learning. He empowers his workers to ultimately create new knowledge. At the same time, while I think they're the right settings, we're also heading towards what I call a crisis of creativity in Australian workplaces. I think Australian workplaces are falling behind in 4 fundamental ways: learning, collaboration, the diversity of people learning and collaborating, but also the connectivity in our workplaces. Let me drill down on these a little bit. First of all, I don't think learning at work is keeping up with the pace of change around us. For instance, in the year before we surveyed everyone, only 42% of workers said that they'd had formal training as part of their work. Formal training could be as little as doing a 3-hour workshop or a 6-week course, yet only 2 in 5 workers have had that opportunity. What's, I think, even further damning is less than 2 in 5, 37% of workers said that their workplace encouraged the sharing of knowledge and expertise with colleagues. That's the 20 of the 70-20-10. And in fact, many of my colleagues think that the 20 is increasing in its percentage. So the ability to share knowledge and expertise with colleagues in a fast-paced environment is increasingly important, yet less than 2 in 5 workplaces, according to workers, actually encourage that. In terms of how much learning workers are doing, less than 1 in 2, 51% of workers said they spend less than 1 hour a week on any form of learning. And we allowed the worker to think of learning in the broadest possible context. It could be sitting down and watching a webinar. It could be learning something. It could be reading. It could be asking a colleague for help on something. Less than 1 in 2 spend an hour a week on any form of learning. At the other end, only 15% of workers spend at least an hour a day. So there's really not a learning culture in workplaces across Australia. I want to break this down just for a second into those results by sector. There are 3 non-government sectors in the economy, plus the government. So the knowledge sector, so ICT, finance, banking, etc. Services sector, education, health, retail, and so forth, and then asset, utilities, mining, construction, and what we see here is that there is, I think, a potential concern about organizations investing in training, but it's actually not transferring into the workplace. So let's take a particular look at the asset and the government sector. So they have, 52% of workers in the asset sector said that they'd had training formally in the previous 12 months. That seems to be a reasonably okay figure, yet less than 40% of asset sector workers say that their workplaces encourage that sharing of knowledge. So what I think is possibly happening, you can sort of see the same trend in the government and to some extent in the knowledge sector, is that we're investing in that formal training, but it's not transferring through to the workplace, through the sharing of knowledge and expertise with colleagues. I think that many organizations are worried about the return on investment of training. And I think that this is potentially a signal that we have poor transfer of training in our workplaces. And that's something that I think we need to be very conscious of. Let's take a look at diversity of collaboration. I think it's lagging where it absolutely needs to be. While the intensity of collaboration is up, so 53% of workers say they collaborate daily as part of their job, and that's up from 46% a few years ago. Yet at the same time, only 1 in 5 workers say that they work on projects with colleagues from across the organization. So while the intensity, so yes, I collaborate with my teammates daily to get my job done, but I don't have the opportunity, only 1 in 5 have that opportunity to collaborate with workers from across the organization, with colleagues that do not look like themselves. And I think that is really not where it needs to be in order to create the ideas and to solve complex problems that we are facing. Again, let's take a look at this by sector. And I don't think any sector is a shining light here. You can see that all of them have a fairly low outcome. Remember, it was about 1 in 2 across the economy. And you can see that the knowledge sector is above that benchmark, but the service sector, which is the largest part of the economy, is significantly below. Regardless of the sector, I think that we need to boost that we need to think of how do we engage workers from across the company, across the organization, to be involved in complex problem solving. Again, it's the diversity of perspective and vantage point that is as important as the expertise. So how do we bring in people from the front line, from call centers, from retail outlets, from not just the people in the C-suite or the R&D department, to think about collaboratively solving problems? I think there's a lack of diversity in who is learning at work and also collaborating at work. This is a word cloud. And this is based on the results out of the survey that we did. So on the left are workers and jobs at an advantage of learning at work. And on the right-hand side are those at a disadvantage. Who's learning at work? Well, it's kind of like the usual suspects. Younger generation workers, university educated, full-time, and especially senior executives and managers have the opportunity to learn at work. But that's at the expense of older generation workers, those that haven't been to university, and those on the front line. Remembering having that diversity of perspective is really important, but also making sure that our workers, wherever they are absolutely as highly skilled and knowledgeable as possible, ensures that that learning is amplified in the workplace. We also have a lack of diversity in who collaborates at work. In this case, men have a higher opportunity to collaborate at work, as well as younger generation, university educated and full-time, at the expense of women, baby boomers, and frontline workers. We're not engaging that diversity, half the population, older generation workers, frontline workers who are facing customers where the disruption is occurring. We're not engaging them in collaboration. And I think that is a major flaw in our ability to create. And lastly, I mentioned about connectivity. What we're seeing is there's been a decay of idea generating connections because of COVID. On the left is what we call a healthy network structure. It's a combination of strong bonds, which are the black lines between members of a team, and strong bonds between teams across the organization in that teal color. That's a healthy structure. But because of virtual technologies, what's happened is that there's been a decay of those idea generating connections across the organization. That's because virtual technologies are very good at having, making work very transactional. They keep us connected to our teammates, but at the expense of connections across the organization. That is a major concern in terms of our ability to generate ideas and to really to create, to solve those complex problems. I think there are many ideas and opportunities that have come out of the work that we've done, but I'll leave you with 2. First of all, I think that we need to reimagine work and workers. So here's some actionable insights, if you like. How do we think of workers not just as value creators, not just as producers of output, as in what we normally see workers, but how do we engage them as value creators? And think about, perhaps an actionable insight is, how do we ensure that it's part of every worker's job to identify problems, to identify potential, signals of disruption, and to make that part of everyone's KPI? I think we need to reimagine learning and work as increasingly being the same. Solving a complex problem and creating new knowledge is both learning and work. And I think that we also need to think about work as a pathway to innovation. Work is at the front line where disruption is happening. How do we make sure that we have that surveillance mechanism to make sure that workers who witness disruption actually feed it into the organization and can be captured potentially as value creation? And the second is, I think that we need to reimagine the office and the physical workplace, especially in this hybrid working environment. I think we need to reimagine space for creativity, to think of the office as a learning workplace where that social learning, that transfer of knowledge, that passive learning occurs, where that doesn't so readily happen online or in virtual working environments. We need to have a shift of mindset that coming to the office is a place to challenge the status quo, not to do business as usual, not to sit at a terminal and do email. It's actually about doing new things, pushing boundaries, creating value. And then lastly, I think, and this is what we're working on, and of course, very happy to talk to anyone, we're working on what we call the new office. And we're reimagining what roles can the office uniquely do that can't be done anywhere else. And I think as part of that, it must be also about bridging those connections. So finally, I'd like to leave you with a little nugget of wisdom. And these 6 words came to me listening to a podcast driving to work when we used to drive to work a couple of years ago. And I want to leave them with you. We are pattern-seeking, storytelling animals. In those 6 words, it was like a lightning bolt to me. It sums up exactly what our human competitive advantage is in a complex, disruptive world with digital technologies and intelligent machines. This is what sets us apart. The future is fast and messy, and you need humans to navigate it, especially in workplaces where we encourage and empower them to do their working, to learn in their work, as well as coming together from across the organization to solve complex problems. Thank you very much for your time today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the Congress. Thank you.